Recording. Okay, so welcome everybody, and greetings from Brisbane or Meanjin. I just want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging on the lands of the Turrbal and the Yagara people here, where I work and live and play. We're really excited this afternoon to be able to invite some guest speakers along to further the conversation around setting up a food hub in the Huon Valley. So the idea, taking from the last workshop, was to look at the first two options around the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure options that came through as being the most popular, solutions to creating a resilient regional food supply, food system here in Huon Valley. So we thought, and we had a bit of a think about those options, and we thought we might invite some guest speakers to best just delve into a little bit more of the detail around, how people are setting food hubs up, or how they're facilitating action on the ground. And that will give us a bit of food for thought for the workshop coming up next week, into business models, financing models, infrastructure models, logistics models, and those sorts of things. So I'm going to hand over to Rob first. Each of the guest speakers will introduce themselves and then they'll launch in. So I'll give them 12 minutes each, 2 minutes to introduce themselves and then 10 minutes to speak to their topic. And at the end of those three talks, we'll go into a Q&A session where they can answer your questions as they come up. So keep in mind, while they're each speaking, that, if anything comes up, just write it down or put it in the chat and I'll make sure those questions get asked. And for those who couldn't attend this afternoon's session, I'll make sure that the recording's done pretty quickly and sent out either tonight or tomorrow morning first thing, so you can get prepared for next week's workshop. So first I'd like to hand over to Robert, who's going to talk about Food Connect Shed, and then we'll have Serenity talking about Open Road, and then we'll go to Bridget, who'll talk about Bendigo FoodShare. Okay, over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Emma, and good to be back on and talking to you about the actual Food Connect Shed. We haven't spoken about the Food Connect Shed in the previous workshop, so it's really good to get a chance to sort of give you a bit of an idea of one aspect of the makeup of the Food Connect Shed. And during Q&A, you can, of course, ask lots of other questions because there's so much to what we are attempting to do with our food up here in Brisbane. So I'm going to focus on just the infrastructure component, like the physical part of the shed. And basically, it's an old 1930s, one part of the building, just steel on steel, ordinary sawtooth, industrial warehouse in the middle of an industrial area, in between two major arterials. So there's a major arterial 5 kilometres to the east and another one 5 kilometres to the south, to the west, that goes west. So it's high. I particularly chose this site in 2007 because of its height. In other words, it was way above any flood levels. It's 2,500 square metres, or roughly, and it's been used, had many uses over a long period of time. It was actually used, the more modern parts of the building, if you can call them modern, they were built during the war in the World War II in somewhere between 1942, and then it's been added to over many years. So it's got many iterations. It's got a lot of character, but it isn't the most ideal building. But the great thing about it was pretty cheap, and we felt with an older building we could actually do a lot of our own modifications, particularly because the whole structure, the whole building, takes up the envelope of the whole piece of land as well. Actually, in some areas, the building goes over the boundary of the property onto council land by 200 or 300 mil in some places, but it gave us a lot of flexibility to do things ourselves. So it's, as I said before, it's out of the flood zone. It had a lot of electricity. So prior in the 80s, it was used as a, it was sort of like the carpet dashboard manufacturing capital of Australia. So it had a lot of energy, grid energy coming into the building, which we felt would be needed because we need cold rooms, freezers, kitchens and all of that sort of stuff. We've replaced a lot of it so far. We haven't replaced it. We've subsidised it with a lot of solar on the roof that we've added over time. So it's got lots of energy coming in. It also had this really unique offices going along one side of the building, along the north side of the building. So it's roughly 40 metres by 50 square metres. It's on a corner. It has 5 roller doors. We built one when we were just Food Connect, when we were just tenanting the building. We put a roller door in 2009 or 10, I think. And then we added kitchens in 2011. But they were all assets that we, that as Food Connect, the social enterprise, added over time. So when it come time for us to approach the landlord and finally get him to agree to sell us the building, that happened in 2017. We didn't have any money. We didn't know how we were going to purchase the building. We just said, can you agree on a price and a point at which you are willing to give us first option and sell the building? So he did. He gave us about 18 months. He named the price and we set it at that. And that way we gave ourselves 18 months to figure out how we were going to buy the building, which we can talk about another time. It's got a beautiful park across the other side of the road that's owned by the RSL, which we use for, gatherings and functions, and now we actually use for weddings. So people get married across the road and then come across to the Food Connect shed and have the big celebration in our event space. So yeah, as I said before, it's 40 by 50. So it's got 900 metres or 90 metres, sorry, of street frontage, which gives us a lot of flexibility. And it's in an industrial area, so we can pretty much do anything we want. Once we got the zoning for, well, we had to get permission to get commercial kitchens built back in 2011. But it still took us 4 years to get a DA to get all the things we're doing now, retail, an event space, and a whole bunch of other things. It's got 3 commercial kitchens in it. One really big kitchen that can be divided into 2, but not physically divided into 2. It's just that two kitchen tenants can use the same space at once. And it's got another kitchen which is more of a fermenter's room. It hasn't got ovens in it, and it's kept at 20 degrees constantly all the time. And it's fantastic for all the. We've got quite a few tenants who are all fermenters, and they love that room to keep their fermenting in. And it's sort of like a separate space to the main cooking area where they can, do their thing. And it's a very collaborative space. The whole 3 kitchens are very collaborative. We've got 4 freezers. We've got 5 cold rooms, so about 300 square metres of cold room space. There's 9 offices, so we've divided some of the offices. And all of these offices have got shared amenities. So there's actually 5 amenity blocks and 4 kitchenettes. We built 2 of the kitchens ourselves, so they're very sort of kitchenette-y type things. And one of the major toilet blocks for the major event space, we built that using a grant, a 50-50 grant for 40 grand back the very first year after we bought the building. We've got this massive area down the back. It's approximately 450 square metres of storage. And this, we didn't know it when we first started the idea. Luckily, we hadn't rented out a lot of the space. So we bought the building with only 4 tenants in the building. Now there's around about 32 tenants. We certainly didn't have any anchor tenants apart from Food Connect itself. But we had this massive area that was sort of empty, and we didn't know what to do with it until all the kitchen tenants started coming in and saying, can we, store a pallet of bottles? Can we store 2 pallets of packaging? Can we store whatever else? And that's become a great revenue for the tenant. Like, it's because you can go up with pallet racking, and we rent that out by the racking space. Unless we have got one tenant who come in and they rent about 180 square metres of pallet space, and so we rented that out to them as a block, which is, and they rent on a year-by-year basis. We have a shared forklift. We have a shared pallet, like electric pallet rack, and we have about 3 pallet racks that everyone shares and everyone uses. Oh, wind-up time already. We've got 1 printer that everyone uses, and this is the real beauty. So the concept of the Food Connect shed was to have this place where we could basically force people into collaboratively working together in the one space where they have to sort of negotiate the sharing. Can I use the forklift? Can I use the whatever else? Can you help me do this? Where do you get your bottles from? Can I maybe purchase bottles from you? And so that sort of it was an idea that we didn't know how it would go, but it's and there's still a lot more to go. But people love that idea of being sort of jammed into a place where they have to sort of get along with each other, and there's no strict times. Like they might rent the kitchen for 4 hours, but there's going to be someone else in the other half of the kitchen and in the other kitchen for 4 hours, and they're always, using the cold room or walking between each other. So it's a really unique space where people have to get along with each other, and out of that comes all of these, people helping each other with marketing, with business plans, with what markets are best to go to, with labelling, all of those things that often are a bit of a barrier to young entrepreneurs. And I'll go into the others as we go in, but having shared loading bays, having we have 3-phase power in the building, so that's pretty important at the start. But I'll leave it at there, and you can ask plenty of questions later on, and we can get into things like the tenant mix or how do we raise the money and things like that. So thanks so much, Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I think if anyone's got any specific questions or you feel like there's more information we can share that's relevant, because of the issue with limited attendees, we'll have a lot more time to chat through anything that we think might be relevant as the conversation goes on. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Serenity Hill now. We've worked with Serenity and Kirsten from Open Food Network for quite a number of years, but I'll let her explain what all of that is about, and she can also talk about Open Road. Thanks, Serenity.
Thank you. Yes, so mostly what I'll talk about today is Open Road, but I think, coming after Robert, and also what the kind of core idea that I want to talk about is activating and using underutilized assets, instead of, we have to build a big building and everybody will come. There is spaces and vehicles and other things that are in the region, wherever you're working, and are probably being underutilized. And so the Open Food Network is an online platform to buy and sell food, but it was very much designed around trying to do this, recognizing that there's spaces that could be activated if we were coordinating information so that food was moving at the same time. And so, for instance, one of our users that was part of the Open Road experiment, which I'll go into, was Strathbogie Local. And Strathbogie Local popped up in COVID because the farmers market so they're in Euroa, very close to where I live in Victoria. And they popped up because the farmers market couldn't operate in COVID. And Shirl, who runs a trucking business, who's also very active in the local food system, said, well, I've got this undercover area, maybe we can do a drive-through thing. And the Open Food Network software enabled them to put out, they were coordinating from sort of 15 or 20 producers, putting their products up, and people order, and then the food is all packed in one afternoon, and people drive through and pick it up, and that space goes back to being the trucking business after that. So that's a really good, on a small scale, example of this thing about using information and coordination to take advantage of assets that you don't need to pay for, which is it can be a good option, particularly when you're piloting or trying new things, to be experimenting and learning from that. So Open Road was a particular kind of experiment where we were looking at how could we do, like, logistics is a massive problem for little community food enterprises and food hubs and farmers all over the place, particularly if you're trying to sell directly to customers. So it's been an issue ever since I've been working in food systems, and it's incredibly difficult to solve without, it's incredibly difficult to come up with kind of an experiment or a project to get funded with a little bit of money. So we had this window of opportunity in COVID when governments were panicking, and there was economic development money to do sort of a larger experiment. And it particularly, unfortunately for us, I don't kind of waste the time talking about this, but it's useful to kind of understand that we got the money because we were solving a sort of problem for the government, in that they'd opened up their own online platform and had offered to move food from any farmer and aggregate it and get it to the doors of consumers all over the state, and then had this realised that it wasn't that simple, and they had this big bill that they were paying every month to do this ridiculous logistics system that they hadn't thought about. So we said, hey, we've got this idea about collaborative logistics. Could we help you think through a different way of doing it? So we got a big chunk of money, which then enabled us to run an experiment. But the problem was that we were so sort of hog-tied with how we could run that because of the constraints of the funding, that I would not suggest that people do it the way that we did it, but I'm going to talk about the learnings and how I would do it if I didn't have to do that. So where will I go next? So we had a lot of users of that government platform, and we had existing relationships with food hubs in 3 different regions. So our commitment was to just try and do collaborative logistics in these 3 different regions. And our original assumption going in was that there would be a whole lot of small users, and we wanted to be able to come up with routes that made sense in terms of coordinating that to get the biggest kind of volume and kind of efficiency, and then work with partner enterprises who could be depots in those regions. So and the problem was, how on earth you start from sort of zero to actually getting up to a scale where that kind of actually makes sense. So we ran this pilot for I think 9 months in total. We successively had Northeast Victoria and Gippsland, and Central Victoria was the last one. And it was a huge amount of work to start from zero in terms of building relationships with the existing enterprises, finding out what their needs were, mapping the patterns of their kind of supply and demand. And then we had money in the grant to basically pay higher fees for these vans that then were moving food around. Through the whole experiment, we moved over 1,000 boxes of food, and we built a plane, like, they say, build while you're flying the plane, the information management system to manage the cold chain information from kind of go to woe through this distributed network of depots that we also managed to set up with the kind of agreement. So the sorts of people so we had Shirl with Strathbogie Local was one, we had Bor Food Hub in Gippsland was another hub. We had a little produce store in Gippsland. There was quite a diversity of like a butcher shop, diversity of enterprises who were like, the problem that we were solving for them was that then they could participate in this transport network and it conveniently, move food as well. So it was in their interest and they were interested in collectively solving the problem that they could see in the region. So they said, yep, we'll be part of that. We've got some space. And then we had an agreement with each of those depots. Now, all of this is, I'll provide the link that we can send to people later. We've got a full report, and in it we're very committed to open source at Open Food Network. So we've made available the template depot agreements, you know, how we did the information infrastructure, you know, even things like the initial expression of interest that, you know, we put out. So if people want to run collaborative logistics experiments elsewhere, there's some learning and also some tools to actually put those together. Now, if I was starting something like this from scratch, I would do it differently. What we ended up finding was that there was a major gap between, obviously, when the funding ran out, being able to continue running the service as a kind of viable thing. And the main reason was the people who are using the service, like for instance in Gippsland, there's other alternative distributors that people can use, and they have a certain way of doing things that means that they can run a viable business. And one of those things is not driving off into the hills way out in the you know, middle of nowhere to pick things up. They, you know, keep within a and the other is often the way mainstream distributors work is they'll bring the food in and store it overnight and then send out to get the efficiency in the system. And lots of the small producers that we were working with loved that they have got a same day kind of delivery, and they loved that we went everywhere. But that was just never going to kind of work out in terms of how we could make the whole system work. And yes, a lot of the way that the thinking behind it was, if we can get the kind of main parts of the system sorted from hub to hub transport, then, you know, we can hook into the existing distributors in Melbourne that could do last mile. So we weren't trying to do last mile, and we weren't trying to do first mile. So we weren't picking up from farm. We were, you know, we wanted to have a system where farmers were dropping at a hub, and so it was this hub to hub kind of regional network. We ended up leaving some great kind of arrangements even after we stopped doing the service. We shifted towards the end of the pilot in like, what are we going to leave in terms of, you know, the actual changes following this pilot on the ground. And we got some great outcomes. And this is where I would focus if I was setting up a pilot like in somewhere else. Great outcomes where there was a meat producer who already was driving a van around way too much. They were doing deliveries all over the place and into Melbourne like twice a week or something. And they didn't want to be doing that. They didn't want to be doing the all of that driving, or if they were, they wanted to fill the vans and make and cover the cost of that. So we hooked them up with a veggie producer who, and then there was one other farmer as well. Oh, that's right, a different a small goods producer, and this butcher. So they both had, or this producer, they had a different range of products. So that then they were actually working together to get wholesale to be selling into butcher shops together in central Victoria, because they had this complementary product list. And then there was a veggie producer as well that could join in on that weekly run. So that was a great example of someone with a van who could make that available to other people. A huge value that we created in the project, irrespective of the logistics, was the investment in regional food activation and people who were in those regions, connecting people, finding opportunities, building trusted relationships. Like, that's the goal, like that's the thing to do first. And then the objective of that is finding where the energy is and finding the fewer, particularly producers that have strong need and strong enthusiasm to be part of a solution, who can then work together to kind of make that happen, instead of thinking that we're dealing with many, many, many people all over the place. Like, it tends to be, where are we going to focus, you know, on this solution with some people with the kind of energy to make that happen, and looking at sort of solutions that make sense in that context, because every region's different, every producer, you know, situation's different. You have to think about it from the information about what's there. And then, yeah, that kind of identifying the shared patterns. What I would say, another important thing to understand about logistics solutions is that it's super important that the design of the pattern is basically not trying to do this kind of first mile and delivering last mile to everybody and their dog, because it's an extremely expensive, energy intensive and complex system to kind of try and maintain. That actually designing the system from the start to take advantage of hubs. Now, Tas Produce Co do this really well in terms of their customers come and pick up from particular sites, hubs, and I think there's heaps of potential. There's an organisation, a logistics provider in Northeast the USA called Red Tomato, that is very, very good at using farm-based hubs. So aggregating, so have producers dropping at a host farm, and that's being the first depot, and then moving that through the system to other hubs, but then have customers pick up at hubs. So this sort of trying to shift the culture, and then you can provide the kind of transport solution on top of that. I think is really important. I've been talking to Liz in South Australia, who is interested in and has got a little bit of funding to explore a logistics pilot over there. And interestingly, they've got, it's very interesting in South Australia, different to Victoria, where there's a strong network of independent grocery stores and supermarkets. So I said, well, that's it, you know, focus there and build relationships there. And can you kind of build in? So it's just, I'm pointing out that what was in Victoria is going to be different to, you know, how this would express in other places. And another really important thing is we had another pilot running at the same time, which was called whole crop purchasing, which was basically a kind of brokerage thing. And that helped us build demand for the logistics, and the logistics helped us enable to do some of that brokerage and supply chain coordination. And basically you can't run a logistics pilot or do this sort of thing unless you've got something that's also working to help your collective of producers and enterprises build demand, and something that's helping you kind of build the supply. Like you sort of need all the things at the same time. If you come up with this amazing logistics solution, you know, you've got to move the food. And yeah, so I mean, that's tricky. Yeah, and I think in terms of funding a pilot like this, I do think that there's probably an opportunity to tap into funding for, you know, electric vehicles or electric vehicle, like potentially actually making all this happen. If it could have an electric vehicle, then it reduces the running costs and the costs of the ongoing kind of whatever's happening. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Serenity. And we'll get to some, I've already got some questions for you, so we'll get to those soon. And great to hear how Open Road went for you guys. I haven't had a chance to read the report myself yet, so if you can provide that link, I can send that out with the recording as well. Right. Well, now we've got Bridget on the line. Thank you so much, Bridget, for joining us in the middle of school holidays, probably from the site of your kids' netball courts, probably. But Bridget, I'll get you to introduce yourself and what country you're standing on today, and your role at Bendigo FoodShare, and just to after that, just to explain to us for around 10 minutes or so. You know, all the stuff that Bendigo FoodShare is getting up to, and the journey you've taken, the long journey you've taken to get to this point today.
Thanks, Emma Kate. Nice to see your face too. I'm Bridget. I am kid wrangling, so if there's any interruptions, you'll, I'm sure, understand. I work for Bendigo FoodShare, which is a food relief organisation based in central Victoria on Dja Dja Wurrung country. I am actually at the moment wearing a few different hats. At the moment, I am looking after a project that we've had funded from Vic Health, and it's looking after the creation of our food hub. I also work with our and head up our community programs area as well. Bendigo FoodShare tomorrow is celebrating its 10-year birthday, and we're doing that with a cake that's being made out of rescued food made by students at Access. So that's a really exciting milestone. I've heard, a number of us over the time say that it would be great if we didn't have to exist, because we have, I guess this is a story of the creation of a food hub that's come from a different point in time and for a different purpose. And so 10 years ago, a small group within the community of Bendigo saw a real need to support people in our community with access to emergency food relief, and looked at different models that were already in existence with the help of Food Bank Victoria, and created out of a small shed in Bendigo, a food relief organisation. And at that point in time, Bendigo FoodShare was sourcing most of the food from Melbourne, from Food Bank and some of the other big food charities like Fair Share and Oz Harvest and Second Bite, but quickly developed its own means of accessing and acquiring that food through doing supermarket rescues, forming relationships with local food producers, with farmers, to get donations of food and to rescue food. So 10 years on, Bendigo FoodShare has about 250 active volunteers that support our activities in the food relief space. We do a 7-day-a-week service right through COVID, didn't stop for one day, it kept on going. Through COVID, we were recognised as an emergency service provider, which was a big milestone for us. Until that point, we operated with little really recognition from the government in terms of recognition or funding. But we were able, as an emergency service provider, to continue on where others had to shut down, to provide a really important service to the community. We do about 114 supermarket rescues 6 days a week, all done with volunteers. Our staff is running probably the biggest that we've actually had, particularly with our Vic Health funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. I think we've got about 11 on staff. EFTs probably at about 8, but until last year we were sitting at 3. So we've grown really quickly, and for most of the time that we've existed, it's been predominantly volunteers. All our board are volunteers, and we service Central Victoria through a distribution model. So Bendigo FoodShare is like a portal for food coming in and getting that food out. Last year it was 800,000 kilograms of food moved through the shed, and went out to about 80 organisations, our food relief partner organisations across Central Victoria. So I don't know, you guys in Tassie, how well you know Victoria, but if you put Bendigo in the centre of it, we're roughly servicing an area of about an hour and a half in each direction. So up to the Murray, down to Gisborne, Dalesford area, over to Heathcote, and across in the west to Avoca. So it's a pretty big area. About half of those food relief organisations are schools, kinders and childcare centres, providing support through breakfast programs, lunch programs, hampers for families. And then we've got big charities like the Salvation Armies and St Vincent de Paul, but the majority of them are small community groups that are responding to the needs within their communities. They do come and go, and so through COVID we saw a lot of groups pop up to look after the needs of the community through COVID times. I guess also, unfortunately, the recognition of Bendigo FoodShare really rose during the COVID times, because everybody through COVID knew someone or was touched by the impact of being food insecure, even if it was only for a moment, going into the supermarket and finding that there was no food on the shelves. So it was an equalising moment in time, I guess, in terms of food risk security, and more people understanding that how fragile our food system is, how the tipping point is really, it's really close for many people within our community. And the majority of people, and I guess one of the messages that we really do try to promote in Bendigo FoodShare is that for the majority of your life and your time, you will be a positively contributing member of community and able to help. But there will be some times where you might have to reach out for help, and that's okay. Trying to reduce the barriers and stigmas to accessing help, because it's a really tough thing to reach out and say, hey, I need support, especially with something so fundamental such as food. So that's been the core of Bendigo FoodShare, and certainly the focus for the first probably 6 years of our existence. And then over the last 4 years, we have really moved into that skills capacity and community engagement space, because like all of you, I'm sure in the room recognise that food security, food relief and emergency food relief it does play a role, and unfortunately plays a really important role, and it's not going away anytime soon, but it is only one part of building a food secure community. So we have a lot of collaborations and partnerships within our community to try and build communities' capacity. But also offer a lot of different engagement points for community to have conversations or help out with food security. So there are people that come into Bendigo FoodShare wanting to volunteer in our shed, to drive the food rescue vans, to do a fruit and vegetable sort, to do administrative help, and that, I guess, is the bulk of our 250 volunteers. There are businesses that want to help by doing food drives or giving us financial contribution. And then over time, we've really working closely with our schools, and they're engaged in many, many different ways. We'll go and talk to schools about food security, food insecurity, trying once again to make some of these hard conversations just part of normal life, especially with the younger kids. And we engage them with growing food and sharing it back into Bendigo FoodShare, or even locally within their school community, and the importance of simple act of growing food to share. We do a lot of cooking programs, and they're also participating in food drives. So schools have really found, whether it is their kitchen garden program or in the kitchen, or the ability to do a food drive, they've found they're really looking for those engagement points with an organisation like Bendigo FoodShare, and that community service element is really, really important to them. The Vic Health funding that we've received, so they have, it's been amazing, recognise the importance of local grassroots responses to food security, and have invested in 7 food hubs across Victoria, and we are one of them. So I'm not sure whether, Serenity, did you speak about them at all? No one has. Yep. So we've got one in Dandenong, one in Whittlesea, one up in Mildura, one down on the Bellarine Peninsula, and one up in Corryong, and ourselves. So they're quite widely dispersed, and all quite different in the way that they have developed, and where they'd like to go in response to their community need there. The focus of the Vic Health Food Hub project is young people. So each of our food hubs have 2 trainees that have a 12-month contract with us. So we'll have 2 this year, and we'll have another 2 next year. And the idea is to provide those young people aged between 18 and 24 to provide them with the opportunity to be immersed in the project and in the local food system, and provide them with as many opportunities as we can to learn growing skills, cooking skills, community development and engagement, advocacy work, and hopefully with the idea that they'll either be employed by the food hubs after that 12-month period, or to be able to get a job locally in the food system in an area that they feel passionate about, which is really exciting. So we've got 2 very young ones, aged 17 and 18, so just out of school, and trying to get them involved as much as we can in everything that we're doing. We also have a focus on bringing in groups within our community that such as multicultural communities, people with disabilities that just have not had as much access to participate in the food system to date. So we're doing that in lots of different ways, including we've just launched a small growers market with a couple of community groups. And one of those community groups has really strong ties with our local multicultural communities. So bringing them in to sell some of the food, some of those that are growing local food and in community gardens and backyard gardens, bringing them in to offer that for sale. So supporting micro businesses, but also to be able to buy that food locally as well. We've got some of our multicultural communities that are travelling all the way from Bendigo to Dandenong to buy the food that they want to eat, which is just not a sustainable thing to do. So what can we do to support them to be able to grow that locally? And we've also got a farm that we've been establishing to be able to grow more of the food ourselves and to be able to sell that as a sustainable social enterprise. Yeah, some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, it's an incredibly diverse set of activities happening out of the one place. And so just on that, Bridget, how many years have you been sort of branching out into those other activities, you know, separate to the actual delivery in terms of the food security service?
Yeah, so probably over the last 4 years. So we started with a program which was funded by the state government, and it was a multi-stakeholder project within Bendigo to set up cooking clubs in organisations that are offering food relief services. Most of the Salvation Army was one, and the others were community houses. So we were able to employ somebody to come in and design the cooking clubs using really simple recipes with food that you might find in a food relief basket, and then taking participants for a number of weeks through the cooking club. So that was really successful. We then pitched for funding to focus on young people. Youth in our area have some of the highest rates of disadvantage across Victoria and indeed across Australia. So our youth-focused project has been going on for the last 3 years, and involves a young person that we've been able to employ, who goes out and speaks to young people at schools and youth-supported organisations about, as I said before, food insecurity and food security, and getting them involved in some of the solutions and helping out. We have an in-school cooking program called Cooking for Change. We've employed a cooking teacher who's fabulous, and she does big batch cook-ups with the students. So they're learning cooking skills, and they've got the community service element, and we also chat to them as we cook about food security. And the meals are shared at the end, and then often come back into Bendigo FoodShare to be shared out through the community. We also have a program we developed last year called Cafe for a Day. So that's working with local businesses, cafe and restaurants, putting young people, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, into a commercial kitchen with a chef who's amazing, in a supported environment, and giving them some real life practical work experience opportunities and selling those meals to help fund the project. Yeah.
That's fantastic. All right, so that kind of ends the talking head. So I think now we still only have a few people. So I'll hand it over to just jump in, take yourself off mute if you've got any specific questions. And if the conversation dies quickly, I've got a whole bunch to keep the conversation going. And we'll keep going until its natural end. I don't think we'll need an hour, but I've allowed, between half an hour and 45 minutes to get a good conversation going. So who would like to jump in?
Emma, Kate, I'm really sorry, technical problems. And then I was listening in via the phone and then it cut out. So we finally got there. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Bridget and Serenity. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much.
Hey, Emily, and good to see Deidre there as well. We were talking earlier with Michelle, thinking, is there something, happened to the whole Tasmanian sort of internet?
Yeah, it is an issue, actually. Like even 20 minutes out of Hobart, there's sometimes some glitches. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to kick off the questions, if that's all right, Emma. And I just wanted to make a comment too that, it's just so good to hear Bridget and Serenity. The one caveat, I suppose, is to everyone who is listening now and will listen probably later on to the recording, is that, you don't have to go through the 10 years or the 18 years of struggle that we've gone through. I think, the example in Victoria with the Vic Health funding more around food security is a really good example of the appetite and the policy settings and the general leaning into by not just government and particularly the health agencies, but also investors. 2 weeks ago, I was at the Impact Investment Summit, and it was remarkable that that's my sixth one, and it was remarkable that food and agriculture is now on the agenda, whereas for the first 3 years of the Impact Investment Summit, just no one. They were sort of why is food, like, it just didn't even rate it as anything important. So I think we should say that you don't have to go through. Well, there's two reasons why you don't have to go through what Bendigo Food Hub, OFN, and Food Connect, and many others have done in the struggling years. There's so much, as Serenity spoke about. The Open Road project wasn't. It was a funded project, and there's lots of learnings out of that. There's lots of learnings out of the Bendigo Food Hub, and there's certainly lots of learnings out of what Food Connect has done. And I suppose my question, Bridget, is with the Bendigo Food Hub and where it's at, because we had a chat yesterday about this, and there is a sort of like, because the Huon Valley are in this sort of, they've got these two ideas that are sort of in some ways counter-opposing. One is a more commercial food hub that operates on a very commercial basis, and then there's this great need, as Deidre's pointed out, and they've done research around the very deep need for food, or the very deep food insecurity problem that is in that area. And there's always these counter-opposing challenges around farmers wanting a better price, but that doesn't solve access to food. And yet farmers are the recipient, in a lot of cases, of food baskets as well during times of stress. So there's this real and you've been around a while, and we sort of briefly touched on it yesterday. You know, your approach, I think, is a pragmatic approach to addressing that, and you've got plans to move more into that commercial arena. Can you perhaps maybe talk a bit more about that, even if they're only just, you know, thinking at the stage?
Yeah, there's lots of thinking about it. So yes, I didn't say Bendigo FoodShare and Bendigo, the community of Bendigo did a food hub feasibility study 10 years ago, and Rob was part of that. Bendigo City Council, the Farmers Market, Bendigo FoodShare, and some other key stakeholders were all part of that. So our journey to a food hub has been long. It was escalated through COVID with the offer of a warehouse that was located right in the centre of Bendigo, and that fell through right at the end. But it did lead to us getting really excited, getting a really big donation from a gold mine here in Bendigo. At that time was the world's richest gold mine. So it was 350,000 that kickstarted our fundraising activity, and we raised in a really short period of time $2.8 million, which included a grant from the state government too. So it was great, really good. But the problem for us was land. And land in Bendigo is really, like, through that time it was going through a really big development phase, and it's rare as hen's teeth, and it was getting really expensive. So we have landed on a piece of land which is Crown owned, managed by Department of Environment here, your equivalent, with a council lease that was had a community group using it, a pony club. And while we thought it would all be really quick and we would have had our building built 2 years ago, our big milestone achievement 3 weeks ago was that we signed the lease. And are hopeful that the building will be completed at the end of this year. The plans and the vision for what the food hub would look like on this piece of land when I started in 2020 were absolutely amazing and incredible. It included, and still does, a warehouse facility double the size of what Bendigo FoodShare has now. Some of that warehousing was going to be offered for farmers, local farmers, to be able to store their food for the farmers market or for delivery into Bendigo. So certainly incorporating other users of that space as well. A commercial kitchen, a social supermarket, and the farmers market itself, and expansive gardens. Since then, we have learnt the land is highly contaminated. Most of Bendigo land is contaminated with mining activities, past mining activities. Doesn't mean we can't still put gardens on it. We just have to make sure that they're raised and above ground. We're not sure, well, we don't have the funds to, at this point in time, to build to the scale that we wanted, because the cost of building has become so much more expensive in a very short period of time. We still have provision for a social supermarket. We're actually not sure if it's the right location or not, because I think I was mentioning this to Emma Kate and Rob yesterday. Bendigo, people have this idea that a regional town is small and that access is easy for people, but it's not true. We're big and sprawling, and public transport's really poor, and the people that need that support probably need access to 4 social supermarkets in Bendigo, as well as a growers market on in every suburb, for example. So we're not sure that that's where we'll place the social supermarket yet. And while we don't have funding at this point in time for a commercial kitchen, there's now also the thinking, is that the right place for the commercial kitchen? There are so many in Bendigo, maybe we should be utilising the ones that already exist. So our thinking continues to evolve, and, obviously funding can drive thinking pretty strongly, but also time. And I guess the more that we've worked with community in spaces where, so one of the strongest messages that we got out of some research we did at the beginning of our youth project was that young people wanted us to meet them where they were at and where they feel safe, and they have the trusted relationships. Certainly we are hearing that really loud and clearly with our multicultural communities as well. So you can't necessarily force people to go where they're not familiar. I mean, that takes time and it can happen, but we've got all of these existing places in communities, so perhaps that's where we need to be. So what our food hub evolves into, and it probably will continue to evolve forever, we're not sure, but it's pretty exciting at the same time, and hopefully we're in the right direction. Rob, I'm not sure, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it was good to hear. And I mean, in particular, the note is that, you know, in all of these cases, things don't go to plan. And it's sort of like in some cases, if you had built that, you know, 2 years ago, you'd be sort of now sitting there, a bit like we have in some ways, where we sort of had this dream, well, 4 years, 5 years ago, and we went about building it. And now we're in the middle of, you know, because COVID, because of Ukraine war, a whole bunch of things have changed. And we're sort of going, right, we need to now do some master planning, or how do we rearrange some of the things that we've sort of built to suit the new climate. So sometimes when plans don't go to plan, it's sort of like a good thing. It gives you more time to actually, you know, think about things and do the research. Yeah, anyway, no, it was good. Thanks for the
We've got Deirdre with a question. Deirdre, you got your hand up?
Yeah, hi, thank you. And sorry, I joined late. I was stuck in the middle of something with work and could only jump in later. So I've got two questions. The first one is around how you conducted your research and how you identified that gap. And the second question is around the distance that you're having to traverse to meet people where they're at. So, for example, in the Huon Valley, towns can be 30 to 40 kilometres apart, and the central hub, Huonville, is 30 kilometres away from some locations. So how do you provide food to people when they're so far away, especially when travel is so difficult? There's minimal public transport. The roads are unsafe. People don't like driving at night time. You know, there's all these barriers for people to be able to get to places. So I'm just wondering about those two things.
So I guess the research, we're probably constantly researching, and data in this space is really hard. We did a social return on investment, which Serenity was involved with 18 months ago. We were also involved through COVID with the state government and the other regional food shares in Victoria, and one of the focus areas there was collecting data. And then we did do our own piece of research, which was done on the smell of an oily rag with young people particularly, which helped us just to get a bit of a baseline idea of what was going on. And that was an online research piece that we did. And we actually, it was two young researchers from Melbourne did it pro bono for us. And I sort of had a little giggle because we pitched the idea with them for this worldwide research competition called Research Got Talent for young researchers. And they were unsuccessful, but believed in this project so much that they did it pro bono and continued with us for quite some time, which was lovely. One of the reasons the research is really hard, or data is really hard to get, is because you're relying on volunteers running small community groups and asking for really sensitive data too. So I think generally, like right across the board, everybody is struggling to get the data of the true level of food insecurity out there. But people want it, especially funders. They want to know, or whether donors want to know, if I give you this much money, what's the impact of that money? How many people can you feed? And so it's a bit of a quandary for us, Deirdre. The way that Bendigo FoodShare operates is, as I said, it's about an hour and a half in each direction, and we're really busy. We have 3 refrigerated vans, 2 predominantly for the food rescues. So I said there's like over 100 rescues that happen 6 days a week. And when they're not doing those, plus the 3rd van, it is out driving to the food to those more remote locations. Some communities receive food weekly, others fortnightly. Some want it weekly, but we can only get it to them fortnightly. So it's as much as we can do, and we would do more with a truck, but it's getting the funding to get that. And actually, with the recent floods that were on Second Bite, supported us by with the loan of another vehicle, which was really fantastic to be able to get food to those flood affected communities more often. As far as the programs that we run, we try to reach out to smaller communities. We don't think it's fair just to be Bendigo centric, but it is a capacity issue. It's capacity in terms of the travel and being able to support each of those community groups with opportunities such as cooking and our Grow a Row program. So Grow a Row is about encouraging backyard schools and community gardens to grow food and to share some, because as gardeners we all love sharing food. But I think that's probably a good one in that program has been designed to work anywhere. So a great example of that was each year we do a potato drive, and we get seed potatoes donated to us, and we share that out through our community. And last year, one of our focus areas was our food relief organisations. So they have a weekly order form. One of the things they could order were the seed potatoes, and so that we had more potatoes going out into the smaller towns than we'd ever have, which was great. And when they grew those potatoes, so one example is the Axdale Community Garden, they shared them straight back into their little food relief group. So that's perfect, and that's what we want to see. We have recently, we've been doing some cooking sessions up in Pyramid Hill at the college there, and we'd love to be able to do more of that, but it is trickier as you get out into the smaller towns. Yep.
Great. Serenity, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say it's a massive problem, and there needs to be public funding to reach them. And I would love to see, I think what we need is publicly funded market gardens and community meal programs in every town. And that can be, training new farmers. There can be food literacy, basis of food literacy, meals for people as well. There's a model in Fremantle, which is called Fremantle Social Farm, where people are members and can come and actually just pick food from that market garden. But the market garden is run by, very skilled people who can produce food very well. So you kind of need to publicly fund a market gardener and a trainer and someone to run the community meals program. Like, there's so much that we can kind of do with social enterprise, and then like I'm sort of getting a bit stronger on this.
Serenity, I agree with you. Because, there's so much money in that space, like in health, this is a pharmacy, isn't it? So it's part of integral. There's so much, and I reckon there's a lot of data. We have a glut of documents in food insecurity across Australia now. It's evident on that database. So we need to just now start to experiment and then invest these critical funds into doing these prototype farms that you're talking about in places.
And on the research thing, there's lots of, sometimes it's kind of easy to get public money to go into scoping studies and mapping. And I'm very skeptical about scoping studies and mapping. I think funding a regional food activator who is the right person who can go and have conversations about need. And I'm not convinced that funders need, all of the pretty data. Like, yes, you can get the data that you need to kind of make the case, but they're also very convinced, and it's very compelling to have stories of what you're hearing directly on the ground from key people. And I think there is having a regional food activator, someone who can build relationships with producers and others easily across, and just having the conversation, who should I talk to next? Having the conversation. And some of the most important things to find is what I was talking about before, like, where's the energy to get something happening, and how do you then support? Well, what do you need to do that? How do you then back that? Anyway. Yeah.
So how have you maintained that momentum? Because I feel like we may be at a bit of a hurdle at the moment, and the number of people that are on this Zoom meeting may be representative of that, and I don't know what the other sessions are like. But I feel like that momentum is in a bit of a dip at the moment. So how have you maintained it over, several years with the volunteer workforce?
Can I talk to this? You go first, Bridget.
I don't mind. You can go. You go.
I think this is a chronic problem across the sector and across everything, because especially with like cost of living prices, households are, there's not so much energy and time to be contributing to volunteering and participation. And yeah, we've found, working with kind of community food enterprises and these sort of things over many years, is that, there's lots of enthusiasm at the start, and that can kind of go for kind of 3 years. And then, the two people, usually a couple, or, the couple of people who started it, then just run out of steam. And so we need to really be honest with funders and about, well, if we're going to run these kind of models, what's the full costing of them? Like there's a tendency to hide all of the volunteer work behind, and that's not in anyone's interest. Like, we need to say, this is what we've got, a model, and it's based on volunteers, and we've got this way of supporting them so they don't die. But I think this is not just in the food, this is across everything. People do not have capacity for brain space, and this is a problem. I don't know. I think we need funded positions.
Definitely, Serenity, we need funded positions, and that's been a really big struggle for Bendigo FoodShare. I think we've been really fortunate with our volunteer base. Before COVID, it was sitting at around 100, and it was a really older demographic, mostly male. At the beginning of COVID, we were really worried about the age and the safety of our volunteers. But at the same time, we couldn't stop. We had to keep going because of the need. So we put out a call to the community, and we got 250 volunteers come forward in one go, which was also a problem. But the positive is that it has changed the demographic significantly. We've now got more women, we have professionals, we've got some younger people. But I think one of the ways we're constantly struggling, like there's always the weekly grind of filling the shifts and making sure we've got enough volunteers on board. And during the winter months, everybody migrates to the north. They're on holidays, the grey nomads, and people generally are busier in their own lives at the moment. So we have to constantly be creative and think about, well, who else? And so now we've got a growing number of corporates wanting to do the right thing by their staff and wanting to jump in and help, which is also, you know, can be problematic because it disrupts your regular volunteers. They're not skilled because they just want to do it once. So we're looking at a corporate volunteering strategy that works for us as well as for them. And it'll generate some money. It'll bring a bit of money into Bendigo FoodShare, so that's a positive. We're getting a lot more schools wanting to come in and work experience placement students volunteering. So I think it's one of those constant reinvent or reimagine what volunteering looks like. But one of the challenges that Bendigo FoodShare had was realising the value and the importance on a paid volunteer coordinator. Yeah, that's been one of our biggies, is pay, and we're probably still haven't resourced that properly. But, you know, that's a huge workforce of 250 people that need looking after.
Serenity?
Yeah, I just wanted to point people to Bawbaw Food Hub in Gippsland, and they're quite a large regional food hub in a regional town, and they're constantly, you know, struggling with viability. They're just about to experiment with a new model that's kind of like a worker co-op, like it's kind of like a co-op where it's a membership model, and part of your membership is coming and doing a shift once a month. They've got an issue where they're paying rent on a building, got huge, you know, their biggest cost is their wages, and they need to figure out how to drastically reduce the wages or get into a free building, you know. So I think that would be an interesting one to watch in terms of that experimentation of having a structured volunteer process with their customers.
Yeah, I mean, on a smaller scale, we have that, we had that with the 30 odd buyers clubs that we supplied, and a lot of those buyers clubs are very much because they're accessing wholesale prices, they're able to keep that going through their they're not actual formal co-ops in terms of the corporate structure, but they operate as co-ops in terms of the way they do their decision making. And basically it's just, you know, a couple of hours a week is required, and there's a roster of people who do the ordering, there's a roster of people who do the packing, you know, and it just gets rotated around, and you pay an annual sort of membership fee to keep, you know, the basic admin and doors open of wherever they're popping up their weekly market. So it can be done on a small scale, and they find that there's a sweet spot in terms of the amount of households that participate in those clubs, and it's usually between 12 and 30 is kind of like the sweet spot. So when people go away, there's still enough people left in the system to keep ordering week to week. Yeah.
On governance, like the legal structures, and so that's sort of something which is a bit of a thing at the moment, and there's quite a strong opinion on what should happen, and I'm just worried. I just want something agile, but I want there to be a board. I want there to be all of those things in place, but not too much bureaucraticness because it's connected to the council. So it's just sort of a way that we can explore those governance models. And is there something out there? I mean, Bawbaw Food Hub, is that a not-for-profit structure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they are, and they have a board. They've just gone through. They've upped their governance. Like recently, they've gone through a big process of putting in place a proper board, and it's definitely the governance needs to be scale appropriate. And if you're just starting with a kind of experimental thing, the best thing to do is have an appropriate kind of auspice organisation and design it around a project. So you've got an auspice organisation that's got, you know, you get the funding and you put a box around it. It's a project. It goes for 2 years. We're going to experiment, do these things. You have all your agreement about how that's going to work. And then at the end of it, you have in that agreement, if this this is successful, you know, we will then the next step is kind of exploring what the appropriate governance would be.
Be the auspicing. What's it called, Robin M? What's Michelle talking about? It's the single authority. Is that kosher?
It's like an independent governance body that sits to the side of council. So there's no political interference, that they take place, and that informs the activities of whatever's happening on the ground. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, so under the Local Government Act, we've got capacity to set up, it's basically an independent structure called a single authority. And so they basically operate with full autonomy and independence of council, but owned by council in that sense. So but in terms of the appointment of the directors that would sit on that board, council would be the only ones that authorise and go through that selection process and permanently appoint those people onto the board. They define the rules for the authority, what their roles and responsibilities are, the functions, and just the parameters around how they would operate. But in terms of their own decision making and control and operation, they have full autonomy and decision making capability. They don't need to put their decisions back to council to get them ratified or anything like that. They've got full control and independence in that sense.
And I like what Serenity said about like it be a project, because it then gives it that kind of innovativeness that it can grow beyond the having a food coalition over the top of the food hub structure and having to report to that, and then also have its own committee too, and to be able to grow and expand within this in this kind of very beginning stages. I just, it's just something that I'm wanting to ensure that things aren't stifled in this really expansive stage. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I think that sounds very heavy, the kind of that model with even with the independent, like it's got the independence, but oh my God, that sounds like quite a lot of work to be setting that up. I'd be going super lean, particularly if you don't know what you'd kind of where the model's going in.
Yeah.
I'd be just defining a project. And
I'm worried about it too, because if I continue in this way, then that means like we've had a reference group and we've had all these things. It's very stressful for me to be working and having to kind of translate. I'm speaking different languages because we're working in this kind of methodological way of it's relational and it's safe to fail experimentation. I'm having to educate people as I go along in this way. I need people kind of to be supporting that innovation and not having to waste 50% of my time speaking, translating. You see what I mean?
It's important to recognise the importance of failed experiments. So you want to be able to go in a structured way to test something and go, oh, maybe that's not where we're going. We're going to go in it. And that's okay. That's good. That's what you want. You don't want to be putting all this heaviness around a model that you come up with to start off with and then figure out. And so, yeah, I'd be trying to find a local organisation, something else that could auspice it.
I mean, there's potential like stakeholders that are really interested in the project, like the Food Security Coalition of Tasmania, Eat Well Tasmania, because the Food Coalition is something that has to happen from this project. It's written into the kind of the plan. The second thing that is written into the plan is to have a food hub business plan. So it's essentially a piece of paper. But anything beyond that is kind of quite open. And I just want to make sure that we step into it. And that said, like Michelle and I had a really great discussion yesterday about this. Having local government involved, supporting this, if we're going for kind of policy innovation projects around food prescriptions and social prescriptions, and also, potential co-op models and challenging sort of how you can, what is this carbon sequestration thing where you can, the $103 million per year over 25 years thing that all the broad acre farms are getting, but not any of the small scale growers. Like, how do we kind of work with those sorts of larger federal government policies that are already existing and challenge them. And local government is a wonderful kind of advocacy. It's a powerful tool to use, but I'm just also, I'm just concerned about having that agility as well.
Yeah, I think next week, and as Michelle's saying, that's just one of the auspicing organisations that you could choose. I think, as Bridget and Serenity have both articulated, the funding is probably the biggest barrier to overcome, because if you don't get that funding in, you need that business plan. In some ways, Bridget was right before saying that the money dictates where the business plan goes in some cases, and because we haven't got, like, for instance, we know, I don't know what the number is, but it's in the billions of dollars federally that's spent on the health system. It's less than 1% of that is spent on preventative health. Now, I know there's a lot of effort to try and make an argument to government to make a lot more of that money that goes into the health system more on the preventative side that would fund these sort of things and put the models that we're talking about in a much better position, because we know they're going to work. That regional place-based idea is got a lot of traction. So we're going to have to look at a couple of different business plans that say, the idea is 5 years and 10 years out, but in the first instance, what is it that we're going to what's the lean thing that we're going to do that can get some money in the door to pay a coordinator, to pay some of the things that Deidre is trying to do with surveys, buy a cold room that sits on the back of a truck. These sort of really simple things that Bendigo Food Hub have gone out and done. We're certainly not suggesting it to do it the way we've done it. We've got a lot of community capacity or community capital in the Food Connect shed, but that took, that was 2004. That took, 16 years before it was in a position to, put in $2 million or $2 million plus in equity. Now we've got there just is much more of an appetite from the government and philanthropic sector to fund things like the Bendigo Food Hub, and then plan your way into these more, commercial activities from there. And as Serenity is saying, do it really lean, but learn off the lessons. There's some really good lessons out there. And of course, what Emma and I will do in the next webinar after the workshop is we'll tease out some more case studies where you can, where the team can further look at, or, ask questions and get down in the weeds of how different models did it to be able to invent the model that's going to be suitable for the Huon, because it is a unique space. It's a very unique area, that has to come from, and as Michelle, when we spent that first day with her, they see their role, and Tasmanian Department of Health see their role as giving, as being the enabler. And then what our role is now is to give the community agency. But I think the money's got to come from somewhere first to be able to give, there's not much agency when you haven't got the money.
But I think my point was that the money can go into a well-defined project where an auspice organisation takes that responsibility. Like that Strathbogie local example I talked about, they set that up in 2 weeks, and the auspicing body was the local environmental group that was incorporated. And it's kind of like, you can make money flow as long as the funder knows that the governance structure, that there's the capability to kind of,
And Serenity, did that have a board, like an incorporated association kind of thing?
Yeah, it's got an incorporated association, and its objects are protect the environment. And then this was it runs an arboretum, and this was a sub project set up underneath that. It received the money. Actually, I think they got a little bit of support from council, but so they did it that way because they didn't know when they started. Is this what we're going to continue with?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Eat Well Tasmania, Carl mentioned to me that Ferment Tas was actually incubated through them initially. Oh, no, sorry. I think Ferment Tas was incubated in that way through an auspicing organisation in Launceston. It wasn't Eat Well Tasmania.
I'd be trying to find a local organisation for an auspice as opposed to a Tasmanian, I reckon. But if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist, and you have to set one up.
Yeah.
Even a land care network. I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Even,
I mean, that's what we used for that was a real breakthrough for the Farmgate Blitzers, because the insurance was covered under a food group that were a land care group that we set up, and we didn't even need an ABN, and then everyone was covered on the insurance. So there's definitely agile and creative ways to do this, and it's then a matter of the funders, for instance, Healthy Tasmania. There's quite like a good relationship there, so very promising. And then also, and there's $300,000 grants that are coming out quite soon. And then the Food Security Coalition has just released an $800,000 kind of fund, and they're very interested in what we're doing in the Huon Valley. So, but it just needs a structure. We need to show the confidence that this structure with the board, in however way it is happy. They're happy with that, you know.
And I mean, when you write the project, it's very important that you've got all of those things considered, like who's involved in this, how do they make decisions about the project, what's the budget, you know. So all of that stuff is then you've got the structure of decision making within the project. So you're not going on day-to-day management of the project to the board of that incorporated association that auspices you.
Yeah.
Hey, Bridget, you know, you mentioned before you went out and because you had this old male pale stale volunteer base, and then you went out and you found, you know, young professionals, much more diverse in terms of the gender. How did you do that? Because I think I mean, I'm only guessing, but I'd imagine that professional sort of onboarding of volunteers have really strengthened the sort of the board, and probably strengthened the financial position.
Yep. In the early days of COVID, it was using media. It was like a big call out through the media to help. And to be honest, in the lockdowns, there wasn't anything else for people to do. And so while a lot of volunteer organisations were shrinking with their volunteer numbers, we increased. People wanted to get out of the house and help in a positive way and connect socially. So that was that. But then ongoing, as I said before, we're finding a lot of local businesses and larger corporations wanting individually as staff members, but also as a company, they want to get people out and volunteering and helping, and they're giving volunteer days to staff to do that. So it's tapping into that.
And did it strengthen, like, just in terms of what Emily was talking about before, and having that sort of professional ability to write business plans, to go and have the confidence to go and approach funders and say, you know, we've got this discrete little project over here, you know, a couple of $100,000, and that money comes in, and there's, you know, just that rounding out of the whole organisation where there's that confidence to put money in. So the team, you know, and obviously you're still running lean, but in terms of giving the Huon Valley Food Hub that, you know, inspiration around how the volunteers, it isn't just people out delivering, it's people who are doing all sorts of other things.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember it and I've forgotten off the top of my head. There's an organisation based in Melbourne of professionals who want to volunteer their professional services to not-for-profits. They're called the Goodwill Collective.
Oh, yes.
And we worked with them on looking at how we could diversify our income stream, because, you know, obviously as the food rescue organisation, there isn't a lot of income coming in. So there were a group of them actually, with lots of different skill sets that came together to help us work through that project. But they could be someone to reach out to in terms of, they're the business case or any project or particular area of work that you're after, they're just on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way of contacting them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. It's also important to note too that because we're having very high level conversations with one of our tenants at Food Connect Shed, Oz Harvest, and they've increased their revenue from, I might get this wrong, from about $18 million a year to $36 million a year, based on the back of, and you'll like this, Deidre, on the back of delivering financial literacy. So these courses around giving people, so not just a hand out of food, but a hand up on how to give people capacity to, cook using fresh vegetables, how to financial literacy as well. That was really interesting. I hadn't heard, and that's in 2 years they've gone from 18 million to 36 million in yearly revenue. Yeah.
Who funds that, Rob?
So a lot of it has come from the feds. Philly, I don't know the exact figure because prior to them going out and doing being more than a food rescue organisation, they never got any money off the federal government. So, but it just and I think this went across the board. I think Fair Share got the same sort of thing. I think what's the other mob down in Victoria?
Second Bite.
Second Bite
and Feedback.
Yeah. And I wonder whether, and Bridget might be able to talk about it, but one of the national things we want to elevate into the and sort of highlight more is what Bridget was talking about before, about how effective these regional food rescue organisations are, how much more impact they have than a larger body in delivering services and having that nimbleness and real understanding of the regional area. I think that story needs to be elevated more so that, and this is not to take money away from those larger food banks, but to add to the money that can flow into solving these pretty deep systemic crises.
Yeah, we had in the summer of 2020 when we had the terrible bushfires, and Food Bank went into emergency management mode, whatever the elevation is, and they pretty much switched off the food to us. So the government had put the reins into their hand and said, you need to look after Gippsland. That was where the fires were. So the food was turned off to the other regions, but we were in the grips of drought, and our food security issues hadn't gone away. It was at that point, or one of those points in time, where we realised that we had to be more self-sufficient. We needed to access more food locally ourselves and not be reliant on some of these bigger charities to turn it on and off. We then were working with the other regional food shares. At that point in time, we had done a little bit of advocacy work with them, and we were friends, but that was about it. So over the last couple of years, with some money from Regional Development Victoria, we've formed an alliance of regional food shares, so a collective Victorian Food Hub Alliance, I think it's called, to help with that advocacy work and also to receive funds on behalf of the food shares to then distribute. So government or another large funder only needs to give the money to one organisation and to have that direct relationship with them, and then they provide that out to each of the regional food shares. So that's been really helpful and worked really well for each of us in terms of our standing and recognition of the work that we do from government. And it means that in the most recent floods that we have been having to manage over the last 10 months or so, government has given money directly to us, and even actually the Melbourne food charities Second Bite, Fair Share, Oz Harvest have been on the phone to us to say, how much do you need and can you get it there? And trusted us to work locally with our communities to get the food there. Yep. But equally too, just a quick little story, like in terms of how you support some of these smaller communities, there was, this was during COVID, and we had government funding to support the purchase of culturally appropriate food and to get that out to support multicultural communities right across Central Victoria. And Pyramid Hill has a really large Filipino community, and they were receiving food from us, but then they stopped. And so I got on the phone to find out why did they stop. And they said, because you giving us this food is, while it's really, really important, it's killing our local business. Our local businesses are really struggling, and they don't receive, like, the local residents support the local economy. There's no tourism, there's no other industries in our town that are supporting our local economy. So we had been running a program in Bendigo called Cafes for COVID, which was supporting local businesses to make meals for food relief. And during COVID, obviously, that was really important because hospitality businesses were really struggling. And it got to the point where government really valued that program because it was supporting food relief efforts and it was also supporting local economy. So we did that in Pyramid Hill. And we said, well, how about we give you some money so that you can use your local businesses to make meals to support food relief efforts in your community. And it worked really well. And they used local produce, so using the local butcher, the local baker, the supermarket, the cafe to make those meals that then supported their community. And we replicated that in other towns after that across Central Victoria. And it also brought the community together in a really positive way. And so in some cases for the first time, because it was connecting business to community services. That was just a little story I wanted to share with you.
Fantastic. I might just signal it's 10 to 6, everyone. So unless there's something really burning, any questions or comments that people might have, Serenity has forwarded me a couple of resources that I'm going to share along with the copy of this recording, which might come in really handy in terms of prep for next week's workshop. And one of those does include a council model where the council's quite heavily involved in the strategy. So that will be able to give people an idea of the different, ways of going about things.
Just to have that tangible, practical, as Rob's language is grounded, like what's the, and I love Serenity's kind of language of the project. So it's, again, this kind of safe to fail. Okay, we're not trying to kind of build Ben-Hur here, whatever the saying is. We just need to do a project within a, confined, like it's got a scope and, and that's the next stage of whatever this is,
Yeah, I think.
And getting that working group together, Emily, I think will be the next really important step as well. And
I really feel that
it's been really difficult getting people to, actually commit time. There's been you, me, Carmel, and Christy.
Kate kind of jumped on there.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in terms of the governance side and the interest in the Food Hub moving forward, that was the group. Like, so you think about all the people involved with the events and who they're leading in that event side. They're not interested in the governance. They're not interested in this work because they want to do the work. So I think that's also where we have to go. It's okay if we just have that core group to move things to the next stage. I think that's really important. That said, Rob and Emma Kate, we are collecting the Missing Voices survey data still.
Yeah, great. No, that's good to see that happening. And I think don't get too You know, this has been, from what I can read, it's been around for 2 years, this process. And one of the things that Bridget said yesterday when we were talking to her about their 10-year journey is oftentimes they stalled or they struggled was when they were trying to make things too perfect.
Yeah.
And there's been so much thought and effort and planning put into this that there might be a bit of a sort of, oh my God, you know, now we've got to deliver on all of that. Whereas we just need to go back to, well, what's the first thing we can do that's a really simple project? It might be something coming out of the research that you're doing, Deidre. It might be something as simple as finding someone to buy a refrigerated vehicle that drives around and we get some funding for it. That was one of the things that was, you know, so I think we need to just go back to, yeah, sure, we've got the big vision, but we need to go back to something that's really
the methodology of the project that and even Michelle and I were reflecting on this yesterday, is set up that these experiments, the activities that we do inform the business model. So the farm gate blitzes, the festival, the food prescriptions, and the First Nations work with the Sacred Heart School. That all, there's activities there that we can expand upon and it can become a project.
Yeah. Done amazing. Like, it's so many things, so many people are activated. And now I think it's just going to come down to, you know, a couple of little projects that we can say, let's get some funding for this, do it, and you know, and just slowly build on that around this bigger vision that's already been set out.
Yeah, exactly.